You know, we get so excited when we hear good news, and we all look for good news. And this year there was talk of what they called an Arab Spring, where protests in countries like Egypt could lead to democracy. But in Syria, that dream has turned into a nightmare.
In fact, Pat, Syria has brutally cracked down on people protesting against the government. Our very own John Waggy has a story.
During the past 5 months of turmoil, Assad has banned the foreign press, so the stories of large street protests and brutal violence come from opposition cameras. This crowd is chanting, "The nation wants to topple the regime." These pictures show the port city of Latakia, where gunboats this weekend joined Syrian troops in shelling areas with many women and children. UN officials fear for the safety of some 10,000 Palestinians in Latakia who have gone missing.
We need to be able to tend to the sick, the dying, women and children, but to begin with, we need to know where they are. So we need access, which is something we're calling urgently on the Syrian regime to give us.
The Assad regime's continued brutality is galvanizing international opinion. There has been a crescendo of condemnation, not only from the world, but in particular from the region.
Strong words from the Secretary of State, but with more than 2,000 Syrians killed, there is still no call from President Obama for Assad to go. Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah called the Syrian government a killing machine and pulled the Saudi ambassador more than a week ago. Many Arab leaders are angry that Assad has his tanks in the streets during the holy month of Ramadan. The U.S. and Europe are still focused on sanctions as a way to push Assad to end the violence.
We urge those countries still buying Syrian oil and gas, those countries still sending Assad weapons, those countries whose political and economic support give him comfort in his brutality, to get on the right side of history.
The Spanish newspaper El País reports that Spain has quietly offered asylum to Assad if he'll stop the violence and begin reforms. That offer is likely to be rejected, and the Syrian opposition can expect to see more tanks in the streets. John Waggy, CBN News.
Thanks, John. What John didn't tell you, and I'll tell you, is that there's a group called the Alawis. They were very closely attuned and tied in with the Ba'ath Party, or the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, which again was a minority. And they are a minority in a predominantly Sunni Muslim society. And the Assads have come in and ruled by military force and brutally. Hafez al-Assad, this Bashir's father, was a brutal man, but he was much more adroit in statecraft than his son is. And now we're shocked because this man who was trained in England in medicine has turned into a ruthless thug. But here's the deal. Under the Alawis, the Christian minority in Syria has been spared. Even under Saddam Hussein, the Christian minority in Iraq was spared. But if a Muslim takeover becomes the rule in Syria, the Christians will be persecuted even as they now are being persecuted in Iraq. That's the danger, and there can be terrible killings, there can be church bombings, there can be all these awful things happening. And when you realize the Syrian Christians go all the way back to the time of the apostles, as do those in Iraq. And it's a tragedy to see what is happening and what will be happening. So as we applaud the fall of Bashir Assad, keep in mind there's a flip side to that story. But this brutality is horrible, and the world now, because of the webcams and other things that are being put to bear, are seeing what didn't get seen 30, 40 years ago under this man's father. Well, Lee Webb has the rest of our top stories from the CBN Newsroom. Lee?
Pat, the leaders of France and Germany are calling for stronger economic discipline among European nations. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy want new balanced budget laws in all the Eurozone countries. They also want an economic government made up of the heads of those nations. Merkel and Sarkozy want the balanced budget amendments in place by next summer. Merkel stresses that the crisis has been building for several years and cannot be solved within days. The debt concerns in Europe are pushing gold higher. It moved close to $1,800 today. Investors are still looking for a safe haven as Europe tries to work out its debt problems. They're also concerned about America's massive debt, which has made the dollar weaker. One analyst from Wells Fargo worries that gold is in a bubble that could pop after fears about global debt subside. Others say gold could face some short-term corrections, but it's still headed for higher prices in the long run. Pat, what do you think?
Well, as you know, I told you several years ago that gold would hit $1,800 an ounce, and guess what? It's already hit $1,800, and it's teetering around that right now in the 1790s, et cetera. In order to match the high of the 1980s, gold would have to go to $2,300, inflation adjusted. So we still aren't as high as it has been in inflation terms. And there's no practical reason it won't go to 2,000 or above. So it'll keep on going as this turmoil continues. Sometime it might turn over and it'll be a sharp correction, but it doesn't seem like in the next few months that's going to happen. Lee?
Imagine no monthly car payments, no insurance premiums, no repair bills, and no need to fill up at the gas station. Those are just some of the perks of a program called car sharing. The idea is popping up in cities all across the U.S. Heather Sells reports now from Denver.
Josh Davies is one of several thousand Denverites who take advantage of car sharing. For Davies, it's a simple plan that fits into his daily life. When he needs a car, he reserves one using his cell, sometimes a day ahead and sometimes just minutes before. He picks it up from one of multiple locations around the city and then returns it several hours later. The cost, just an hourly charge. For him and his wife, it's been an easy change. They live in downtown Denver and wanted to do something good for both the environment and their pocketbook. For the Davies, car sharing has meant they need to own only one car.
It's just a lot of money that you spend needlessly to have a second automobile. So that's why we decided to go with a car share.
And they're not alone. The practice started in Europe and is now picking up traction in the U.S. Car sharing expanded here by 16% in the last year. In cities from New York to San Francisco, more than 500,000 people are registered to use some 7,000 car share cars.
Our members are early adopters, they're environmentalists, they're families that are watching their pennies.
But Hill admits the model works best for urban dwellers who also have transit and bike options. That's because the cars are typically placed in downtown locations and members pay by the hour, so shorter trips are better. For Davies and his wife, the environmental payoff and the savings make it a win-win.
Typically, I'm using it for an hour or 2 hours at a time. I'll go drive for a meeting somewhere and bring it right back. And so it's costing me around $20 per trip that I use it, and I maybe use it 2 or 3 times a month.
It's not uncommon, says Hill, for families that car share to drop a car. And that also helps reduce congestion, pollution, and eventually could reduce demand for parking.
We also are really aiming for the family that might have 2 or 3 cars, and they could maybe reduce that.
If you're not in the mood to rent a car in Denver, you can rent a bike. And that is perhaps the ultra green way to go here. Reporting in Denver, Heather Sells, CBN News.
The European Space Agency is planning a mission to see if spacecraft can be used to move asteroids. The London Daily Mail reports scientists are trying to figure out if they can actually change the path of an asteroid if it's heading towards Earth. The mission is called Don Quixote. It will use 2 spacecrafts, one to fire at a test asteroid, the other to collect and analyze data. The mission is expected to take place in 4 years. Researchers say that Americans are becoming more and more addicted to tanning beds. They call it tannorexia. And as Andrea Garrett reports, it's proving to be deadly.
Over the years, experts have made it clear that tanning comes with many health risks. Yet every year, nearly 30 million Americans go to indoor tanning beds, and more than 1 million of those visit tanning salons every day. A new study published in Addiction Biology suggests a new theory on why tanning remains popular despite the health risks.
We call it tannorexia because what happens is that they're never satisfied with the amount of tan that they have.
Researchers say that findings point towards tanning being addictive. They say the brain of a frequent tanner responds to tanning in areas associated with rewards. the same areas activated in other addictions.
Certain regions of the brain that we know are responsible or partially responsible for drug and alcohol addiction seem to have increased blood flow when you put UV light in front of these individuals who are known as frequent tanners.
These new findings could explain why increased awareness about skin cancer, premature aging, and wrinkles are having little impact among those who obsessively tan. And people are beginning to tan at younger ages. Katie Donner began tanning in 6th grade. She only stopped when she was diagnosed with melanoma.
I continued tanning throughout high school and about 3 times a week.
The most deadly type of skin cancer, melanoma, is more common in women and kills women predominantly in their 20s. So this is a life and death issue for these women.
Each year, melanoma kills more than 9,000 people. Researchers say that people under the age of 30 who use a tanning bed 10 times a year have 8 times the risk of developing melanoma. Andrea Garrett, CBN News.
Pat, melanoma is such a dangerous and deadly disease. Hopefully people are getting the message about this.
They get the message, but don't you get tired of scaring people? Every time we turn around in this program, we're scaring them about something else. You're eating too much fat, you're sitting around the couch too long, you're watching television, you're watching pornography, you're tanning, you're good anorexia. I mean, give me a break. We have so many problems. We are so addicted to ourselves. We're inwardly focused on, holding our pulse. What is it, David? Oh, get a life, Christy.
Well, that was fun commentary because I was thinking I didn't know what to say about the whole tanning thing. All I had was jokes, and I'm not going to go there.
You don't obviously go to tanning beds, do you, dear? Go on.
This is Au Naturel.
President Obama will unveil his plans for job growth in a major speech early next month. The president's plan is likely to include tax cuts, ideas for infrastructure, and measures to help the long-term unemployed. He will also present a plan to cut the national debt. The speech is expected right after Labor Day. A prayer circle is credited with saving the lives of the band Sugarland. The country duo was set to perform on the stage that collapsed at the Indiana State Fair last weekend. They were in a prayer circle before the collapse when their stage manager decided to hold them backstage for a few minutes longer. Helen Rollins' decision probably saved every band and crew member's lives. Sugarland is planning a private memorial service in Indiana to honor the 5 fans who were killed in that tragedy. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.